The room was thick with cigarette smoke, laughter, and the low hum of instruments being tuned for another late-night jam. It was one of those rare gatherings where legends didn't need an audience, just each other. Freddie Mercury leaned back against a piano, grinning like he always did, eyes sparkling with mischief. Ozzy Osbourne sat nearby, nursing a drink, still buzzing from the chaos and energy that followed him everywhere he went. They were talking about music, not charts or fame, but voices, real voices. Freddie, ever theatrical, had been teasing everyone all night, showing off dramatic warm-ups that sounded more like opera than rock. He hit a note so clean and powerful that the room went quiet for a second. Ozzy laughed first. All right. He joked, shaking his head. Save it for the opera house, mate. Freddie turned, eyebrow raised, that famous smile spreading across his face. Opera house, he said lightly. Then, pointing straight at Ozzy, he added, You know what? You should sing opera. The room exploded with laughter. Ozzy nearly choked on his drink. Me, opera, he scoffed. You having a laugh, Freddie? Freddie nodded seriously, too seriously for it to be just a joke. Why not, he said. You've got drama, you've got pain. Opera's full of that. Ozzy waved it off, laughing louder to cover the strange flicker of discomfort that crossed his face. Opera was precision, discipline, control. Everything Ozzy thought he wasn't. His voice came from chaos, from darkness, from instinct, not from years of formal training. Still, Freddie didn't laugh along with the others. He studied Ozzy closely, like he was hearing something no one else could. I'm serious, Freddie said calmly. People think opera is about perfection. It's not, it's about emotion. The laughter faded a little. Ozzy shifted in his seat, unsure why the joke suddenly felt heavy. This was supposed to be banter, rock stars messing around. But something in Freddie's tone made Ozzy wonder if this wasn't a joke at all. No one in that room could have imagined that one offhand comment, one playful challenge, was about to lead to a moment so powerful it would leave one of the greatest singers in history in tears. And Ozzy Osbourne changed forever. The laughter in the room slowly died down, but Freddie Mercury didn't move on. He stayed where he was, arms folded, eyes still fixed on Ozzy Osbourne, as if the joke hadn't ended at all. Most people would have let it go by now. Another bit of backstage banter, nothing more. But Freddie wasn't most people. Ozzy noticed the silence first. What? He asked, half smiling, trying to keep things light. You're not serious, are you? Freddie stepped closer to the piano and gently pressed a single key, letting the note hang in the air. People misunderstand opera, he said calmly. They think it's about fancy technique and perfect notes. It's not. It's about control. Yes, but more than that, it's about truth. Ozzy frowned. Truth. Yes, Freddie replied. Raw emotion, pain, fear, love, all the things you already live with. That struck something deep. Ozzy had spent his entire career being told what he was: wild, unstable, chaotic, the Prince of Darkness. Opera didn't belong in that picture. Opera was for polished voices and clean lives. Not for someone like him. I wouldn't even know where to start, Ozzy said. His voice quieter now. I'm not trained like you. I just sing. Freddie smiled softly. Exactly. The room grew still. A few others shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this was no longer a joke. Freddie sat at the piano and played a simple progression. Nothing dramatic, just enough to set a mood. Tree, he said. Ozzy laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. You're mad, he muttered. I'd sound ridiculous. Everyone does at first, Freddie replied. That's how you know you're being honest. Ozzy hesitated. Years of performing in front of massive crowds hadn't prepared him for this moment. This wasn't about screaming into a mic or feeding off an audience's energy. This was exposed, personal. There was nowhere to hide. What if I fail? Ozzy asked. Freddie looked up at him. And you learned something about yourself. The challenge hung in the air. Ozzy took a deep breath, feeling eyes on him, not judging, just watching. He thought of every time he'd been underestimated, written off, laughed at. Maybe this was just another one of those moments. Before he could change his mind, Freddie nodded encouragingly. "Go on," he said. "Just once." Ozzy stood up slowly. "Have you ever been challenged to do something completely outside your comfort zone? Comment below which country or city you're watching this from." The piano waited. The room waited. And Ozzy Osbourne, for the first time that night, wasn't sure whether he was about to embarrass himself or discover something he'd never known he had. Ozzy Osbourne shifted nervously in front of the piano. The room, once full of laughter and chatter, had grown quiet, almost reverent. Freddie Mercury, leaning casually against the piano, gave him a small, encouraging nod. "Just feel it," he said softly. "Don't think. Just sing what's inside you." Ozzy took a deep breath, the kind he usually reserved for launching into a scream at a packed stadium. But this was different. There was no crowd, no roaring fans, just the raw expectation of truth. He opened his mouth and let out the first note. It cracked. A sharp, untrained sound echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls. Ozzy's eyes widened in shock, his stomach sinking. He looked up to see Freddie's expression. Surprisingly, Freddie wasn't laughing. Instead, his eyebrows were slightly raised, and there was something in his eyes, a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "Again," Freddie said gently. "Don't fight it. Don't try to be perfect." Ozzy swallowed hard, feeling every ounce of self-doubt creeping in. His voice shook, faltered, then cracked again. A few of the other musicians in the room exchanged glances, some stifling their laughter, others watching intently, sensing that something special was unfolding. "I'm terrible at this," Ozzy exclaimed, laughing nervously, trying to hide the growing frustration and embarrassment. "I told you I'm a rock singer, not some opera guy." Freddie chuckled softly. "That's exactly why it matters." Ozzy frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "Because the thing that scares you the most is where your voice will be strongest," Freddie explained. "Opera isn't about perfection, it's about honesty. Every crack, every hesitation, that's your soul speaking. Stop trying to sound like anyone else, let it be you." Ozzy paused, absorbing the words. His usual bravado faltered, replaced by something deeper, curiosity, vulnerability for the first time. He considered that maybe Freddie wasn't asking him to sing opera for fun. Maybe this was a challenge meant to unlock a part of himself he hadn't yet explored. He closed his eyes and took another deep breath. This time, he didn't try to hit the note perfectly. He let it flow naturally, letting the rawness of his voice fill the room. It was shaky at first, strained, but there was a depth to it, a genuine, unfiltered emotion that no studio recording or stage performance had ever captured. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Freddie Mercury's eyes glistened slightly. He didn't speak immediately, letting Ozzy feel the weight of the moment. Then he finally said, That was remarkable." Ozzy opened his eyes, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or both. "Really?" he asked, still skeptical. Freddie nodded emphatically. "You have no idea. That was real. That was truth. And truth always moves people." Ozzy felt a swell of pride mixed with disbelief. He had stepped into a world he thought was beyond him, exposed himself completely, and survived. More than survived, actually. He had created something raw, beautiful, and honest. The room remained quiet for a moment longer, everyone letting the impact of what had just happened sink in. Then the first tentative clap broke the silence, followed by more, until the entire room was applauding. But Ozzy barely noticed. His mind was still spinning from the realization that he could do this, that he had the courage to try something entirely foreign, and maybe even excel in it. What would you do if you were in Ozzy's shoes? Would you quit or stand tall? Comment your thoughts below. He looked at Freddie, who gave him a wide, encouraging grin. "See?" Freddie said, "You're stronger than you think. Don't ever forget that." Ozzy nodded slowly, a rare, genuine smile spreading across his face. He had laughed at the idea of opera, feared failure, and yet, here he was, standing taller than ever, having faced his doubts head on, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that raw, exhilarating sense of possibility that comes only when you dare to step outside your comfort zone. The first note had been shaky, the second hesitant, but by the third, he was no longer just Ozzy the rock star. He was Ozzy the brave, the vulnerable, the unstoppable. And he knew this was only the beginning. The room had fallen into a quiet, almost sacred hush. Ozzy Osbourne, still catching his breath from his first real attempt at opera, looked around nervously. The applause had died down, replaced by a tension that was impossible to ignore. Everyone waited, not for perfection, but for what came next. Freddie Mercury stepped away from the piano, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. He moved closer to Ozzy, his eyes locking onto his friends with an intensity that made Ozzy straighten instinctively. There was no jest now, no teasing smile. Freddie's voice was calm, measured, carrying weight beyond words. "You see, Ozzy," Freddie began, "opera isn't just notes or technique. It's everything you've ever felt: pain, joy, regret, love. Every note has to mean something. It's the rawest, most honest way of expressing yourself." Ozzy swallowed, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had spent decades performing on the biggest stages in the world, yet he had never been asked or dared to expose himself like this. Rock gave him energy, power, even chaos, but opera demanded vulnerability. It demanded truth. Freddie paced slowly, letting his words sink in. "You've always sung from instinct, from darkness and raw emotion. That's why I said you could do opera. It's not about sounding polished. It's about being real. Every crack in your voice, every hesitation. That's your strength." Ozzy felt a shiver run down his spine. He had never thought of his flaws as strengths. His growls, his screeches, his uncontrolled energy. They were what made him Ozzy Osbourne in the eyes of the world. But Freddie was telling him something different. Those same flaws could be transformed into beauty. "You're holding back," Freddie continued gently, "because you're afraid of failing. But failure isn't the worst thing. Not trying. That's the real failure. Right now, I don't care if you sound perfect. I care if you're honest. That's all that matters." Ozzy's eyes met Freddie's, searching for the joke, the sarcasm, the hidden mockery. There was none. Freddie's expression was sincere, almost reverent. For the first time, Ozzy felt seen not as a rock star, not as the Prince of Darkness, but as a musician, an artist, a human being capable of more than he had imagined. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the instruments scattered around the space felt like silent witnesses. Freddie leaned against the piano once more, letting the words settle. "Take a moment," he said. "Let yourself feel everything you've been holding back. Don't fight it. Don't control it. Let it out." Ozzy nodded slowly. He closed his eyes, letting the stillness envelop him. He thought about every scream, every song, every note that had carried him through life's chaos. And for the first time, he considered that maybe, just maybe, those raw experiences were exactly what he needed to bring opera to life. He took a shaky breath and opened his mouth again. But this time, he wasn't thinking about the notes or the technique. He was thinking about everything Freddie had said. The honesty, the emotion, the truth. His voice wavered. Yes, but it carried weight. It carried story. It carried him. Freddie's eyes softened, a small, proud smile appearing on his face. He didn't clap or cheer. He simply nodded, letting Ozzy experience the moment fully. "That's it," he whispered. "That's real music." And in that instant, something shifted. Ozzy Osbourne realized he was capable of more than he had ever dared to believe. He felt a spark of something unfamiliar but exhilarating, potential, courage, and the beginning of transformation. Have you ever had someone push you beyond what you thought was possible? Share your story in the comments. The tension in the room began to lift, replaced by quiet excitement. Everyone present sensed that this was not just a lesson in opera, it was a lesson in life. In bravery, vulnerability, and the power of stepping into the unknown. And for Ozzy, it was a turning point. The moment when fear and doubt began to transform into something extraordinary. He opened his eyes, took another deep breath, and prepared to face the next note. Not as the man who had laughed at Freddie's joke, but as someone willing to risk everything to discover the truth in his own voice. The room was heavy with anticipation. Ozzy Osbourne stood before the piano, his hands trembling slightly, his mind racing with doubt and excitement. He had already tried once, shakily navigating the unfamiliar world of opera, and Freddie Mercury's words still echoed in his ears. "It's not about perfection, it's about honesty." Freddie leaned casually against the piano, a supportive presence rather than a critic. His eyes sparkled with a mix of encouragement and awe. "You're ready," he said softly. "Let it out, Ozzy, don't hold back." Ozzy closed his eyes and let himself feel the moment. No stage lights, no screaming fans, no expectations beyond truth. He took a deep breath and sang. This time, it was different. His voice, though still raw and untrained for opera, carried something more profound: emotion, experience, and vulnerability. Each note told a story: the pain of his struggles, the chaos of his life, the unfiltered essence of who he was. The sound was shaky in parts, yes, but that imperfection made it beautiful, real, and electrifying. The room was silent. Every ear strained to catch every nuance of his voice. The musicians, the assistants, even Freddie himself, were frozen in awe. Ozzy's usual stage persona, wild, untamed, unpredictable, was gone. What remained was something far more powerful: a human being bearing his soul. Freddie's face softened, a proud smile slowly spreading. He had seen many talented singers in his life, but what he was witnessing now was extraordinary. Ozzy, the man who had been called chaotic, dark, and unpolished, was creating something transcendent. Ozzy's confidence grew with each note. His voice swelled, cracking at times. But the cracks weren't weaknesses, they were strengths. They conveyed honesty, and in music, honesty resonates louder than perfection. Freddie's hand hovered over the piano, ready to guide but not interfere. He let Ozzy lead. The intensity in the room grew. The tension was no longer nervous, it was electric. Every listener felt it, a raw, transformative power moving through them. Ozzy's voice rose and fell, carrying both darkness and beauty, chaos and control. It wasn't opera as the world knew it, but it was opera as Freddie had described it: pure emotion, truth, and vulnerability. As the final note lingered in the air, silence followed. Then came a single tentative clap, quickly joined by more. The applause grew, not because Ozzy had sung perfectly, but because he had dared to step beyond himself. He had taken Freddie's challenge and transformed it into something remarkable. Freddie Mercury, usually quick with praise or wit, didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at Ozzy, eyes glistening, his pride evident but his demeanor calm. "That was incredible," he finally said. "Do you understand what you just did?" Ozzy opened his eyes, breathing heavily. I don't know," he admitted, a mix of disbelief and awe on his face. "I didn't think I could do it." Freddie shook his head, smiling warmly. "You didn't just do it, Ozzy, you transformed it. You took fear, hesitation, and doubt, and turned it into art. That's what makes a true performer. Not talent alone, but courage." The room erupted with a mix of cheers and applause, but Ozzy barely noticed. He was still processing the revelation. The man who had teased him about opera had shown him a new path, a new potential he had never imagined existed. Have you ever surprised yourself by doing something you thought was impossible? Comment below with your story for Ozzy. This wasn't just a musical experiment. It was a lesson in bravery and authenticity. He realized that stepping into the unknown, embracing vulnerability, and confronting fear could produce something more powerful than any stage performance he had ever given. And as he glanced at Freddie, who gave him a subtle nod of affirmation, Ozzy knew one thing for certain: he would never hear the word impossible the same way again. This moment, this note, this truth, had changed him forever. The first laugh at Freddie's joke was long gone. What remained was respect, inspiration, and the quiet, undeniable power of discovering what you're truly capable of. The room was silent, heavy with the aftermath of what had just happened. Ozzy Osbourne stood, chest rising and falling as if the very act of singing had drained him completely, yet energized him in a way he had never felt before. The tremor in his hands had vanished, replaced by a strange calm, a newfound awareness of what he could achieve when he embraced honesty over fear. Freddie Mercury, usually flamboyant and full of dramatic flair, was unexpectedly quiet. He leaned against the piano, his eyes glistening as he watched Ozzy. The pride in his gaze was unmistakable. A tear ran down his cheek, catching the soft light in the room. He wiped it quickly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You did it," Freddie whispered, his voice barely audible. "That was real. That was truth. That was music in its purest form." Ozzy, still catching his breath, looked at Freddie incredulously. I didn't think I could do it. I really didn't. Freddie shook his head. That's exactly why it mattered. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just being you. That's what made it extraordinary. That's what moved me to tears. For a moment, both men stood in silence, letting the weight of the moment settle. The others in the room, musicians, assistants, friends, watched with awe. They had expected a joke, a failed attempt, maybe even some laughter. Instead, they witnessed something rare, raw vulnerability, courage, and artistry meeting in perfect harmony. Ozzy finally spoke, his voice quieter now, tinged with a humility that few had ever heard from him. I always thought opera was for someone else. Someone perfect, not me. Freddie smiled softly. There's no such thing as perfect. There's only honesty. Freddie smiled softly. There's no such thing as perfect. There's only honesty, and tonight you gave every note your truth. That's more powerful than perfection. Ozzy looked down, processing it all. He had spent decades being told who he was. The wild rock star, the chaos, the darkness. But in this quiet room, with Freddie Mercury's words echoing in his mind, he realized something profound. His voice, his experiences, even his imperfections were strengths. They could move people in ways he had never imagined. He felt a strange mix of relief and exhilaration, pride and vulnerability. The challenge that had seemed impossible had revealed something he didn't know existed inside him. Have you ever witnessed someone embracing their fears and surprising themselves? Share your story in the comments. Freddie stepped closer and placed a hand on Ozzy's shoulder. Don't forget this moment. Remember that fear is just the beginning of discovery. Every crack in your voice, every hesitation, that's where your soul speaks. Ozzy nodded slowly, a genuine smile spreading across his face. For the first time, he felt seen not just as a rock icon, but as an artist capable of raw, emotional expression beyond anything he had tried before. The room, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now felt alive with possibility. The tears Freddie had shed weren't just about Ozzy's voice. They were about the power of connection, courage, and honesty in music. They were about witnessing someone step past doubt and fear to discover a new dimension of themselves. In that quiet room, Ozzy Osbourne had experienced something transformative. He had faced the challenge, embraced the unknown, and in doing so, had unlocked a truth that would stay with him forever. And as the applause, quiet, heartfelt, and sincere, began to ripple through the room, Ozzy realized he wasn't just a rock singer anymore. He had glimpsed a new horizon, one where fear became fuel, vulnerability became strength, and honesty became art. The quiet room, once filled with anticipation, laughter, and doubt, now hummed with a different energy, one of awe, respect, and inspiration. Ozzy Osbourne, still catching his breath from the emotional intensity of his operatic attempt, looked around at the faces of his peers. They were not just impressed, they were genuinely moved. Word of what had happened that night spread quickly, first among the musicians and crew, then across social media platforms, interviews, and music forums. Fans were stunned to hear Ozzy's voice transformed, raw and emotional, yet authentic and deeply moving. Clips of his operatic attempt went viral, shared millions of times, and comments flooded in from around the globe. People were not just reacting to a performance. They were inspired by the courage it took to try something completely outside his comfort zone. Freddie Mercury's role in the story also captured hearts. The video clips of him guiding Ozzy, encouraging him to embrace honesty and emotion, showed a side of the legendary performer that many had never seen: a mentor, a believer in potential, a champion of raw artistic expression. The combination of Ozzy's breakthrough and Freddie's mentorship created a narrative that resonated deeply with viewers. The power of stepping into the unknown, the importance of vulnerability, and the transformative nature of genuine support. For Ozzy, the experience was life-changing. He began exploring his voice in ways he never had before, experimenting with different styles, techniques, and genres. Opera, once an alien concept, became a tool for self-expression, a new way to connect with emotion and audience alike. His confidence grew, not because he had mastered something overnight, but because he had dared to face his fears and discovered what he was capable of. Fans from Tokyo to Toronto, London to Los Angeles commented on the videos, sharing their own stories of stepping into fear, facing doubt, and discovering hidden strengths. The engagement was overwhelming. I never thought I could do something so scary, but watching Ozzy try made me believe I can. This is proof that it's never too late to discover new talents. Even the music industry took notice. Critics, who often dismissed experimentation by rock artists as gimmicks, praised the honesty and raw emotion in Ozzy's performance. He wasn't just a metal icon anymore. He had become a symbol of courage, resilience, and the limitless potential within all of us when we embrace authenticity. Freddie Mercury's mentorship, Ozzy's bravery, and the global response created a ripple effect. Musicians, performers, and ordinary people alike felt inspired to challenge themselves, to try the things they had always feared, and to embrace their own voices, literally and metaphorically. If you believe no one should be limited by fear or expectation, type respect in the comments.